Okay, so welcome to this webinar, which is on maximising income from your IP. I'm Rodney Elder, and thank you for taking the time to listen to some of our customers and how they are working to maximise their income from all of their titles. So today, we're going to be covering about 30 minutes or so, and if you've got any questions, please pop those into the question box and we will answer those at the end of this session. So today we're going to cover who we are, some challenges of the current market, maximising income by embracing opportunities, and best practices for interdepartmental cross-product workflows. And we're going to look at a case study of Bonnier Publishing. Now, it's a lot to cover, and if people would like to look into more detail of any of these points, we will be offering follow-up sessions for people who would like to delve into the detail. So, quick snapshot of VirtuSales. VirtuSales is a software and consulting company. We've been around for over 20 years now and have clients around the world. We focus solely on the publishing industry and have customers that range in size from 2 users up to a couple of thousand users. So some of our smallest publishers are using everything that some of our biggest publishers are, and they're actually all using the same software. Whether you're a small publisher or a big publisher, you still have to do all of the fun things of publishing, which is, managing contracts, rights, royalties, production management, bibliographic metadata management, inventory management. It's all the same. It's just the scale of it. So with our customers, whether it be in education, trade, or multilingual, they all have the same problems and challenges, and what we do is provide consulting services to help them maximize their efficiencies and to be able to maximize their income from their IP. So 2020 has been a very, very tough year for the majority of people in the world at the moment. The publishing industry has done pretty well when we look at other industries. Obviously, there's some, a lot of challenges with remote working and other things, but ultimately people are still consuming a lot of content, and it's just that how are they consuming that content is changing, and audio is obviously having a huge uplift over the last couple of years. And with a publisher, one of the challenges is how can they keep operating with all of the various changes that are happening. And that's what we're just going to touch on, some of those today. So it's not all doom and gloom. There has been some companies that have struggled, where they're still operating in sort of the older traditional ways, where others are actually really booming. And so what we want to do is look at some of the changes and how they are embracing those. Just a quick snapshot of the UK publisher revenue for 2019. The main interesting points here is really the size of the digital sales, which incorporates audio and ebooks, and then you've also got this very large rights and licensing component and co-editions. So what is changing is obviously the age. There was a good session on for Book Brunch, and it just outlined that the number of people over the age of 60 is going to double by 2050. So when as a publisher looking at as our population is aging, are you ready? What formats are they going to be consuming the content in? as technology improves for audio, how are you going to be able to produce audiobooks as part of your publishing program in a more automated fashion? But first of all is, what rights do you actually have for those? So that's what we want to make sure, is that you actually, one, have the rights and you can easily access that information. So maximising the opportunity. Points to consider is, know what rights you have. And so if, with a lot of publishers that we've come across, many of them will have contracts that are sitting in basements, in folders. So one is being able to have them easily accessible, to then be able to promote those. So we want to make sure that if you've got rights for multi-language, translation, audio, all those types of things, permission sales, that you're able to, one, know that you have those, two, promote those, and three, be able to process those sales. So as the size of sales is decreasing in the actual revenue value, but it is actually increasing in the number of transactions, the efficiency is going to be critical for being able to make sure that you can keep up with that. So what we have found with many publishers is that they will leave money on the table, and it's not out of choice, but it's out of necessity, based on what they can handle with their current processes and systems. So, when we go in and we look at publishers and we sort of look through some of their opportunities and some of the challenges, what really is the top one is adequate information. Is, what do they know about all of their individual titles, and how easily can they access that? So if you have someone who's looking to do a permission sale, and the revenue from that is 100 euros or $100. If that's going to take you half a day to research the information, then the value of processing that has diminished. So, you also then have this problem of time, where if it's taking you a long time to process the sale of a permission or a license deal, because you're researching what you can and can't do with your IP, that's taking time away from processing other deals, which is taking time away from your headspace. So what we want to do is look at how can you more effectively manage the microtransactions of your IP and chop them into as smaller chunks as possible. If you could imagine bookstores faxing orders still, many publishers unfortunately treat their IP in that sort of fashion, where it's a very, very manual process for processing deals, which then does have a big limit on them in terms of the quantity of those deals that they can do. So things aren't going to get simpler. They are just going to get, more sophisticated. I can say complicated as well. And so if you don't embrace that change and adjust, it is going to have an impact on one, ability to adapt to the market, and also to again, maximize the income for not only yourself, but also your authors. So, we want to look and encourage people to be proactive. And when publishers don't have the time to be proactive and they're always reactive, that's going to mean that, you can't necessarily choose where the most productive income will be for yourself. So we're going to have more formats. So it's going to keep increasing, more distribution channels, rights, permissions, and licensing. You look at Disney, and how they're chopping up their content into these microtransactions. We have many customers who deal with Disney, and they will buy a right for a very specific channel, for a very specific type of product. And the thing is, what enables Disney to do that is, one, they know what rights they have, but it's also being able to process that sale. So they have to, our customers then have to report back to Disney and other licensees to chase up to say, hey, have we been processing? We have other customers who are sort of operating on the Disney front, such as Candlewick Press, who will license out their IP to other parties. But they need to then be able to follow up on that and make sure that the IP is being used in the way it was licensed to do. But if it's all manual processes, you know, if you have to do that, just like you're chasing up the, can you actually do something with your IP? If it takes you half a day to process the sale of a right, but also then to chase it up on a regular basis, if you go from 500 deals a year to 5,000 deals, the impact on being able to actually process those effectively is going to diminish if you don't have the right systems and processes in place. So, you know, publishing isn't a simple process or industry. You know, you've got your products that you need to manage, you've got financial considerations, tracking costs, producing costs, scheduling in your work. So for each new product type that you output, whether it be, you know, a print book, a co-edition, you know, you're going to have product records, financial records, scheduling tasks. You're going to have collaboration with third parties, whether they be printers, translators, converters. You're going to have to distribute your products, whether that be in warehouses and also in terms of retailers. So are you going through all the various retailers and channels? You then need to manage your contracts and rights for each of those, the royalties, and the sales reporting. So royalties is obviously the end of the line in terms of reporting back to the authors, but all of these are, you know, critical opportunities for publishers to be able to automate processes, which if something is extremely time consuming, when you times this out by, you know, the hardback, the ebook, the audiobook, and add in translation plus merchandising deals, all of this becomes to cause the publishing process to grind to a halt because there's just not the right processes to set up and process. So in terms of looking at this, you know, how useful is this? We just participated in BISG, which is a book industry study group in the US, and they did a rights white paper. And some of the key things that came out of that were, you know, the digital program, being able to identify what you have. And it's not just ebooks, you know, 5 years ago, it was all about ebooks and things like that. But now ebooks is you know, got its own life, its own workflow, but there's lots of other digital rights that publishers need to understand what they can and can't do with it. And you just can't survive as a publisher if you aren't, one, exploiting your own rights that you have. But also, I think this is a very interesting one here, is where you've got, we have someone who was doing 1,000 deals in licensing. They went to 5,000 and they're saving 10 to 15 minutes per deal. Now, that doesn't seem like that much, but when you times it out, that's 30 weeks a year in terms of savings. So it is a huge impact. You know, with publishers reducing the number of people that they have, so that, you know, we've had a lot of publishers who have furloughed people. They're being expected to do more with less people. So how can they really have the headspace if they, you know, don't have the right processes and systems in place? Just to give you an idea of some of our other customers and some of the, because there's no point sort of listening to someone just talk about these things. We want to see, what the real output and value is. Some key things here is being able to increase your output with the same resources, increase sales. If you don't have some automated processes, you can't do this. You can't go from, say, 18 journals to 69 journals with the same number of people if you don't have automation in place. We just looked at before, being able to process, contracts and rights and be able to see what you can and can't do. If you need to go up from 1,000 deals to 5,000 deals, how are you going to do that if you can't find that information and it takes you too long to process those deals? And then we've got, a big saving here in processing royalties. Again, if you are looking to increase your list or increase the number of deals you're doing, if royalties is causing you to have a huge backlog and a huge processing pain, then you can't actually increase the number of titles because it's not scalable. And we're actually going to dive in and have a listen to one of our customers, Bonnier Publishing, and what they did a case study, and it's really interesting in terms of talking about what they had before and what they moved to and the impact it had on them. So as we're going through and just listening to this, it's from Shane Hegarty, who works at Bonnier Publishing, and it gives a really good insight into some of the values of the publishing process and changing.
Where when I first joined the company 5 years ago, one of our imprints had an old FileMaker Pro database that was itself out of date even for FileMaker. Some of the others use spreadsheets as their sole database. I mean, that's a generous term to use. A lot of key info like address books were in people's actual physical notebooks or sitting in Excel documents or Word documents. We had filing cabinets full of unscanned documents and, more importantly, contracts, which is a disaster waiting to happen. And then there are just the bits of paper and things lying around the office which may be really important or they may not be. And most importantly, we had to hand create all of our scheduled sales sheets and documents. And then most importantly, as people were leaving the business, we were losing a huge amount of editorial knowledge because we didn't have a centralized database that someone could come in with relatively little training and just pick up where they had left off. So it's probably obvious, but some critical reasons for why we had to change. We had too many systems or a lack thereof. We had consistency of data or a lack thereof. Interdepartmental synergies or lack thereof. Operational scalability, serious lack thereof. Data security and integrity, total lack thereof. And huge amounts of waste and inefficiency and duplication and just general confusion about what was stored where and who was responsible for maintaining it. And when it comes to maintaining, there were endless amounts of filling in data and metadata spreadsheets, and as I've worked through the business, I was doing a lot of that personally, so I have a particular bug in my craw about that one. And on that note, just a metadata spreadsheet warning for anyone else out there who has had to suffer at the hands of filling in Amazon and similar spreadsheets. Just a quick flash, and I don't get an opportunity to be creative very often, so this is my collage of various ways we were storing. At the top there, our warehouse data, at the bottom, our Amazon data. In the middle, we've got some production scales, just crazy amounts of info in really unstructured ways. So our escape route, which was settled on by people before I joined the business, but I'm still very happy they did, was VirtuSales BiblioLive publishing system. And the core modules that we use are the bibliographic and editorial, production, contracts and rights, royalty processing, and then my personal favorite, the data distribution, which handles sending out our Onyx feeds to multiple channels and retailers, including the add-on bit to this presentation, which is Ingram CoreSource, who are our main ebook distribution platform for distributing files, but also, more importantly, for data. So currently our data goes from Biblio to CoreSource in a nice clean way, and then CoreSource chop and change that data for the various retailers who we have direct and indirect relationships with. And the last part which we're working on now is sales aggregation, and that is CoreSource working on ways to automatically, as much as possible, gather sales data for reintegration into Biblio to feed back into the royalties module, and I'll talk about that in a second. So just to look at how Biblio actually takes data in and feeds it back out in the various locations that it's possible to send them to, and I'm sure we're probably not even using it to its full extent. We've got bibliographic editorial, production, contracts, and royalties. All of these are being filled in by users at various levels. That results in finished product and metadata, hopefully. Website feeds are kind of a sideline that we use. We send XML feeds, and there are many other types you can send as well. And then more importantly, we send Onyx distribution to our retailers, our print retailers specifically, in this case Amazon and Nielsen being the two biggest, but also some others there that you'll recognize. We also have a feed that goes to our warehouse using an old standard called Vista, and that's with GBS, and that's recently we've got that working, and it's been fantastic. It takes so much pressure off of people to remember to put things out of print or check whether something has had the rights properly removed. And then the last part, the core source ebook file distribution, which I mentioned previously, sending to all of these various retailers who have weirdly different requirements for the Onyx data, even though it is technically a standard, and core source have made that much, much simpler than it used to be. And then the final piece, which I said is really more ambition at this point, which is sales aggregation and ingestion, reducing as much as possible those last few spreadsheets that are still being amalgamated by hand. So what we're looking for really, and what we're striving to get to is, and Rodney and Biblio suggested this name, is the perfect circle, and I like the name. And in the top right you'll see we start with really a title acquisition using Biblio, moving through to production, entering our contracts and rights information, distributing that out as metadata to core source for ebook distribution, but also to our physical channels, and ideally then sales aggregation coming back in from core source for royalty processing in Biblio. Now that part on the left is, say, the ambition bit, but as you can see, it covers pretty much every area of the business, and it frees up a huge amount of time, which I'll just point to now. So some of the reasons that we selected Biblio specifically, there's a lot of competitors obviously. So we didn't have the resources at the time, or even now, for an IT team to develop or to manage or upgrade any system, and obviously that's handled by Biblio every 6 to 8 weeks. A big part of that that's useful to us is that development work being done for other publishers also benefits us, and vice versa. So we're all on the same system, and we're benefiting from each other's investment in that system. We've got full access to the system from US and Australia, and we can communicate with our colleagues via it. It's cloud-based. We have the ability to add new companies to Biblio using the existing setups, which I'll give an example of further down. It's a fully integrated system proven with market leaders, and that's really key for us. We've got to have stability, and we've got to know that the system has buy-in from big players, and obviously Hashcat, paying Random House, and these people doesn't really get any bigger. There's multi-currency management. We're an international business, and it's not good enough to have a system that works for the UK. It has to work everywhere, and so far, if it hasn't worked, VirtuSales have been keen to make sure it can, and it's rare now that we come across a case when we can't sell. And retaining and processing complex contract information. I mentioned earlier on all of those contracts that were sitting in filing cabinets. All of those now have been scanned and entered on the system. It's a very complex process, but once it's done, they're usable for multiple purposes, and they're safe, and the data is structured as opposed to sitting in a PDF document which nobody will ever even open if we're looking. And then I mentioned, and obviously is the key point in this presentation, data distribution has saved a huge amount of time for me personally. So just to look at that from a data perspective, some return on investment benefits that we've seen. Some of these numbers are a little spurious because it's hard to quantify, but I've had personal interactions, so I'm confident in the spirit of them. So we've saved about 50% of our time processing and preparing royalty statements. To be honest, you could possibly even say 70 to 80% depending on how bad the system was before. We've set up Onyx feeds that we didn't have to interact with VirtuSales in order to create, which is huge because there are always retailers upgrading their systems, looking for new feeds, wanting to change things. We've got full access to that, and once it's complicated, but once you've got your head around it, you've got relative autonomy to set those up as you see fit. We've greatly improved the frequency and accuracy of our data as well. In the past, it's all well and good sending one perfectly accurate spreadsheet, but if you never update the titles, then you're really missing a huge opportunity. We're saving several hours a week managing the ebook distribution alone, which relates to that previous point of trying to keep things up to date, not just sending them out the first time. We've standardized and simplified an awful lot of our internal reporting. Things that used to be done by hand on a spreadsheet are now output from Biblio's very, I would say, very complete reporting system. You can report on pretty much any area of the system, and 99% of the time you can get the data you want back out in a spreadsheet or in a nice looking PDF or an HTML document. Just the last few points on this. So we're saving probably another 30 to 40% of our time making sales sheets. Now, obviously somebody still has to input that data into the system, but the difference is we're pulling in biography data from somewhere else where someone had to fill it in, or description data that someone had to put in for marketing reasons, and Biblio is turning that into a nice looking PDF document as opposed to somebody hand creating it in Word, believe it or not. About 50% of our time in preparing acquisition estimates for a similar reason. They were done on spreadsheets before, and you've got someone sitting down putting in royalty rates or tweaking things. Now we've got lots of various templates in place, and editors themselves are able to get 90% of the acquisition done, and someone like myself steps in at the end just to finesse a few numbers or double check that it makes sense. And which I mentioned above and just wanted to emphasize, integrating new imprints or publishers or companies has been huge for us, as I mentioned earlier, with the fastest growing UK business in publishing, arguably. And we have to be able to adapt. And our most recent acquisition, John Blake, is very close now to being live on the system for royalties. We acquired them a few months ago. There were about 1,500 contracts, which was a huge amount of work, but through a combination of manual entry, data uploads with in-system tools, which are quite complete, and with ad hoc assistance from VirtuSales, who are very capable and aware that every publisher is slightly different and that sometimes you'll need a little bit of help. We've got them operating pretty much inside of our systems now within the space of probably 6 months, and that's with probably, with realistically maybe one full-time person and a couple of part-time people helping him out. And they were operating on the 5 years ago model. So once you've got the system up and running, it doesn't take years to get things done. In a couple of months, you can integrate someone into this much more advanced database. And so finally, just to run through a kind of practical example of how that looks for anyone who's never used the system or seen it before. Maestro, which is a huge title for us last year. So you've got at the top level of Biblio multiple editions and formats, and you can see here on your screen with Maestro, we've got trade paperbacks, hardbacks, paperbacks, signed copies. All of these various editions can store data that is relevant to them, or they can share data across the work where it's relevant and distribute that as relevant depending on which retailer needs what. It's all very modular and very adjustable depending on what we need, and this was a complicated example. Oh, and sorry, just to go back to that, if there's anyone listening who deals with co-editions, we don't do so much here, but our sister company is heavily involved in that, and there are extensive areas of the system for dealing with that type of model with multiple editions on single ISBNs. Looking at it from the user perspective, a lot of people who log in will see this. It's the editorial dashboard screen or marketing dashboard screen, which is adjustable at the user level currently. And I know VirtuSales are developing ways for a user to change their view on the fly. At the moment, you can click into these screens and in most fields edit them directly, as opposed to having to go to, for example, on the left, edit edition specification is a particular area on Biblio. And rather than the user having to go find that area, they can just click in here, change the field, and then go back to doing something more interesting. And that's just a closer view in case the other one was too small to see. There's a lot of detail. Then we've got our production, which is slightly more prosaic, but the impression level essentially. Every printing of the book has a record on Biblio, and you can see if you squint there's extensive amounts of detail relating to the costs, and this is where the P&L comes in. You're estimating what your editorial and design costs might be, putting in production costs based on scales. Again, work that would have taken a lot of man hours is now relatively automated. And then contracts. I mentioned contracts earlier on are extremely complex, and here's just a quick snapshot of the summary page of a contract. This is from Maestro, which is a relatively simple contract actually, but you can get anything you want in there, and it deals with it in a fairly complete and user-friendly way, as much as is possible with things as complicated as contracts. And obviously that feeds through then automatically to determine our rights, where we've acquired those rights, and then we can log where we've sold those rights. And then more importantly, data distribution. I say importantly because selfishly this is my favorite bit. And Biblio is turning all of the information that users are entering in their day-to-day into, or restructuring it to be appropriate for Onyx, which is the principal standard. And the Onyx wizard, which is on the screen now, is a quick way for a user to see where those things relate to in the system. You can click on those fields, it'll bring you to that box so you can quickly fix it. And essentially what we're trying to do is turn this, which looks lovely and is for user-friendly, into that, which is what unfortunately retailers need. And although people like myself like to look at things like that, your general user wants what's on the left, they don't care about what's on the right, and Biblio is the intermediary to make sure they never have to look at it. And the last part really, which is the ambition again, we're distributing through CS at the top there. You can see some retailers failed. That's because we haven't sent them a price or we don't want to sell with them for some reason at the time. And on the bottom, the sales aggregation tool, CoreSource IQ, which will hopefully feed back into the Biblio system. And ultimately, we're trying to create royalty earnings. This is an overview of what that looks like, broken down, as you can see, earnings by edition, sub-rights income, in order to give our authors this, and hopefully it'll make them happy. And as you can see, it's a very clean royalty presentation, and I can't emphasize enough really, it's not my area, but my colleague says that this has saved him, he can't even estimate how much time it has saved him to be able to present this automatically to customers or to authors and agents in nice clean PDF format.
Okay. So obviously there's quite a lot that Shane covered in there, but I think the main points that I'd like to make of that is really the touching the data once. So, you know, you need to leverage the information you have. It's just that with many publishers, they're sitting in multiple systems. And so if you have to go from one system to another system to another system to get the information, it complicates and slows down the process, which, as you can see, when you're trying to do, you know, co-edition sales or sub-right sales, permission sales, all that type of thing, it really does limit the number of transactions that you can process. So that's where we need to look at the automation and distribution processes, removing dual data entry, and being able to see your contract information and rights information, and being able to find a workflow management system that supports your processes and hopefully helps you optimize those, which is going to be critical for maximizing your IP and income. So, you know, in terms of a system, what we recommend you look for is looking for something that can help you automate processes and workflows. A really important point there was the time saving of 50% for preparing your acquisition estimates. So, you know, that means that you can process double the amount of acquisition estimates to hopefully identify the correct acquisitions you should be making. So we want to also share that information across departments. So when you're then, you know, you've done your acquisition estimate, you've got your contract data in there, that when your author actually rings up and says, oh, that title that we signed up with you, can you give me some royalty information, or what rights have you sold on that, that people can quickly access that information, and they don't have to go to different people or different teams to be able to find that. So the other thing is, when you're trying to acquire an author, you also want to make sure that you can tell them that these are the systems that are supporting you to help them maximize their income, which obviously helps yourselves, but to be able to tell them about how you're going to be able to promote the sale of rights for their book, be able to promote it through all the possible retailers and make sure the data is accurate. These are the sorts of things that authors are expecting publishers to come to them with that information. And, you know, why would an author go with a publisher as opposed to self-publishing? This is the differentiator, and your unique selling proposition to authors is to be able to show them what you can do different to other publishers or obviously self-publishing. So, and being able to deliver that information in as real time as possible is going to be critical, and being able to report back to the publishers and also the authors of their royalty earnings through things like a portal and so on. So if you would like to find out any more, please visit virtualsales.com, and if there's anything else, please feel free to contact us, and we wish you a very good Frankfurt Book Fair, which is virtual, and hopefully next year will be in person. So thank you very much for your time.